She pretended to smile, while flashing a silent distress signal. One Hell's Angel saw everything. Rain tapped against the window of Rosalie's diner, steady and gray, turning the parking lot outside into a smear of dark asphalt and puddles. It was the kind of Tuesday morning that felt like it belonged to nobody. Too early for the lunch crowd. Too late for the truckers who liked their eggs before sunrise. Only a few booths were filled. The smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee hung in the air, mixing with the hum of an old radio playing softly behind the counter. Maddie Kessler sat across from Trent Holloway in a booth near the back, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had long since gone lukewarm. She hadn't taken a sip in 10 minutes. She just held it, like it was something to hang on to. Trent was talking. He was always talking. "I'm just saying," he said, his voice low and even, the same tone he might use to explain a math problem to a child. "You don't need to laugh like that. Not with a stranger. It's embarrassing, Maddie." She had laughed a few minutes earlier, when the waitress made a joke about the weather. Something about how the rain probably needed better attorney representation given how much it had been raining lately. It wasn't even that funny. But Maddie had laughed anyway. A real laugh. The kind that came out before she could stop it. It felt good. It felt like being a normal person for 2 seconds. "Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today." Now back to the story. Trent hadn't liked it. "I wasn't laughing at anything," Maddie said now, keeping her voice light. "She was just being friendly. I know what friendly looks like." Trent's jaw was tight, though his face stayed calm, pleasant even, the kind of face that would fool anyone who wasn't looking closely. He never raised his voice in public. He didn't need to. "You don't have to perform for people, Maddie. It makes you look—" He paused, like he was choosing the word carefully, like he wanted it to land exactly right. Desperate. Maddie felt her stomach fold in on itself. She kept her smile in place. She had gotten good at that, keeping her face steady while something inside her curled up small and quiet. "Sorry," she said. "You're right." She wasn't sure when she'd started saying that. "You're right. It used to feel like a lie every time. Now it barely felt like anything at all." Under the table, out of Trent's line of sight, her hand trembled slightly where it gripped the coffee cup. She was tired. The kind of tired that lived deep in her bones. The kind that no amount of sleep seemed to touch. She hadn't slept well in months. She hadn't laughed like that in months either, not until a few minutes ago. And now it felt like a mistake she'd have to pay for all day. Trent kept talking. Something now about the vendor meeting he had later that afternoon. How he needed her to double-check the invoices again before he sent them out. How it wasn't hard, Maddie, you just need to pay attention. His voice rolled on, smooth and low, the way it always did when he was laying out expectations disguised as casual conversation. She nodded along. She said, "Okay," in the right places. She kept her eyes on him, kept her expression soft and agreeable, because that was easier than the alternative. Easier than the silence that came after, the kind that stretched out in the car, in the apartment, in every space where his disappointment could take root and grow. But under the table, where he couldn't see, her hand moved without her fully deciding to let it. She folded her 4 fingers over her thumb, slow and quiet, the shape of it small and hidden in her lap. Then she brought her fist up just slightly and tapped it, once, twice, against the side of the ceramic mug. She had read about it online, months ago, late one night while Trent was asleep beside her, and she was scrolling through her phone with the brightness turned all the way down. A silent signal. Something you could do with your hand, in public, without anyone else understanding what it meant. Something that said, without a single word, "I need help. Get me out." She didn't know if it worked. She didn't know if anyone had ever actually been saved because of it, or if it was just something people shared online to feel like they'd done something, some small act of hope you could hold on to in a moment like this one. She tapped it against the mug again anyway. Trent kept talking. The rain kept falling outside the window, and Maddie Kessler sat very still, waiting, without knowing if anyone in the whole diner was watching her at all. Marcus Reyes sat at the counter on his usual stool, third from the end, the one with the wobbly leg he'd learned to lean away from years ago. His leather vest creaked a little as he shifted his weight, the patches on the back facing the room like a story nobody had asked to hear, but everyone recognized anyway. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, with gray creeping into his beard and lines around his eyes that came from squinting into wind and sun on long rides. His hands were rough, scarred in small places, the hands of a man who had fixed a lot of engines and thrown a few punches in his younger years, though those days were mostly behind him now. He forked up the last bite of his eggs, over easy, just the way he always ordered them, and glanced at Rosalie as she topped off his coffee without being asked. "You're gonna turn into a hash brown one of these days, Marcus," Rosalie said, setting the pot back on the burner. She was a solid woman in her 50s, apron stained with years of gravy and syrup, her gray hair pulled back in a bun that never seemed to move no matter how fast she worked. "Same order every single time. Don't you get bored?" "Man knows what he likes," Marcus said, his voice low and easy, carrying the kind of warmth that made strangers relax around him, even though his size and his patches usually did the opposite at first glance. "Why mess with a good thing?" Rosalie snorted and moved down the counter to check on another customer, and Marcus went back to his plate, in no hurry. Tuesdays were slow. He liked slow. He liked sitting here with his coffee and the rain outside, and nowhere in particular to be. That was when he saw it. The mirror behind the counter ran the length of the wall, old and a little foggy at the edges. Mostly there so Rosalie could keep an eye on the grill without turning her back on the register. But it also gave a clear view of the booths behind him, including the one near the back where a young woman sat across from a clean-cut man in a collared shirt. Marcus wasn't watching them on purpose. He'd clocked them earlier, the way he clocked most rooms out of old habit, more reflex than intention. The girl looked tired. The man looked like he was talking a lot. Nothing unusual about that. But then he saw her hand. It was small in the mirror, just a flicker of movement below the table's edge, easy to miss if you weren't looking right at it. 4 fingers folded down over her thumb, a closed fist held low and hidden. Then she brought it up, just slightly, and tapped it twice against the side of her coffee mug. Marcus's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. His chest went tight. A fast, hard pull like something had reached in and grabbed hold. He set the fork down slow, careful not to let it clatter against the plate, his eyes fixed on the mirror, on that small hidden fist, on the girl's face that was smiling like nothing at all was wrong. 15 years peeled back in an instant. He was standing in his mother's kitchen, the smell of coffee and cigarette smoke thick in the air, and his sister Elena was sitting across from him at that same old table with the chipped yellow paint, her hands shaking as she showed him how to do it. 4 fingers, folded over the thumb. Tap twice. "If I ever do this," she'd told him, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes darting toward the hallway like she expected someone to come around the corner, "you'll know. You'll know I need you to get me out. I can't always say it, Marcus, but I can do this." He hadn't understood, not really, not until the night she finally called him from a gas station 40 miles from her husband's house, sobbing so hard she could barely get the words out. He'd driven through the dark without stopping, without sleeping, and he'd never once forgotten the fear in her voice or the shape of her hand when she taught him the signal 3 months before that call finally came. He hadn't seen anyone else use it since. Not once. Not in 15 years. Until now. Marcus's jaw tightened. He looked past the mirror, over his shoulder this time, his eyes finding the booth directly. The young woman was still smiling, still nodding along to whatever the man across from her was saying, her face calm and pleasant, and utterly unreadable to anyone who wasn't looking closely. But Marcus was looking closely now. He watched the man's mouth move, watched the way his hand rested flat and still on the table, controlled, deliberate. He watched the girl's shoulders, drawn in slightly, her body angled just a little away from him, even as she kept nodding. Marcus didn't move yet. He just watched, quiet and steady, his breakfast forgotten in front of him, his mind sharp and clear in a way it hadn't been all morning. Marcus kept his eyes on the mirror, but his body stayed loose, easy, like a man with nothing on his mind but his coffee going cold. That was the trick of it. You could watch a whole room without anyone knowing you were watching, if you knew how to hold your shoulders right. The man across from the girl leaned in close. Too close. The kind of close that wasn't about wanting to hear her better. It was about crowding her, making the space around her smaller so she'd have nowhere to put her eyes except on him. He was maybe 30, clean-shaven, dressed like he sold something for a living, insurance or cars or promises. His hair was combed careful. His shirt was pressed. He looked, on the surface, like exactly the kind of young man a mother would be proud to bring home. But Marcus had spent enough years reading rooms to know that the surface didn't mean a thing. The man's phone sat face up on the table, and every few seconds his eyes flicked down to it, quick, checking something, though nothing on the screen seemed to be lighting up or buzzing. It wasn't about the phone. It was about control, Marcus figured. A man like that needed to know where every piece was on the board, at all times, needed to feel like nothing could move without him noticing. The girl's purse sat pushed to the very edge of the table, like even her belongings weren't allowed to take up too much space. His mouth was moving in that clipped way some men had, short sentences, flat and hard, the kind of talking that wasn't really talking at all but instructions dressed up to look like conversation. Marcus couldn't hear the words from where he sat, but he didn't need to. He'd heard that tone before, coming out of Elena's husband's mouth at a 4th of July barbecue years back, right before Elena had gone quiet for the rest of the night and stayed quiet for weeks after. Rosalie came by again with the coffee pot, and this time she leaned in a little as she topped off his mug. Her voice dropped low so it wouldn't carry. "Those two come in every Tuesday, regular as clockwork," she said, not looking at the booth, keeping her eyes on the coffee like she was just doing her job. "Same booth, same time. He always orders for her before she even opens her menu." Marcus's jaw flexed, just slightly. "That so?" "She always looks worn thin," Rosalie said. "Real thin, like she hasn't slept right in a year." She straightened up, tucking a strand of gray hair behind her ear. "I don't know what goes on with folks, Marcus. Not my business to know. But I notice things. 20 years behind this counter, you notice things." "Yeah," Marcus said quietly. "I imagine you do." Rosalie moved off down the counter without another word, leaving Marcus alone with his coffee and his thoughts, the rain still ticking soft against the windows. He didn't look at the booth directly again. He didn't need to. He had the picture now, clear as anything. A young woman who folded her hand into a signal she probably hadn't used in years, maybe ever, sitting across from a man who leaned too close and checked his phone like he was counting seconds, who ordered for her before she could speak for herself. Marcus turned his coffee mug a slow half-circle on the counter, working through it, patient the way he'd learned to be patient, the way that had saved him more than once from moving too fast and ruining something that needed care instead of speed. Then, behind him, he heard the scrape of a chair. "I'm going to the restroom," the man said, his voice carrying just enough for Marcus to catch the shape of it, flat and final. No question in it at all. "Stay put. Don't talk to anybody." Marcus's eyes lifted to the mirror in time to see the girl nod, small and quick, her hands folding together on the table in front of her, still and careful, like she was holding herself in place. The man stood, straightened his shirt with 2 short tugs, and walked toward the hallway at the back of the diner without so much as a glance behind him, certain, in the way of men who never expected to be questioned, that she would still be sitting there exactly as he'd left her when he came back. Marcus set his coffee mug down. He rose from his stool, slow and unhurried, the wobbly leg creaking once beneath him, and started toward the booth. Marcus stopped a few feet from the booth and put on the kind of easy smile that made bikers look like uncles at a barbecue, instead of the thing most people crossed the street to avoid. "Excuse me, miss," he said, keeping his voice low and friendly, the same tone he'd used talking to a spooked horse. "Sorry to bother you. I'm trying to get out to the interstate, and I got turned around somewhere past the feed store. You wouldn't happen to know the quickest way, would you?" Maddie looked up at him fast, her whole body going tight for just a second before she caught herself. Up close, she was younger than he'd guessed from the counter, maybe 24, 25. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry, like she'd cried herself out a long time ago and just kept going through the motions since. She had a way of holding her shoulders that reminded him too much of Elena, pulled in tight, small, like she was trying to take up as little room in the world as she could manage. "Oh," she said, blinking. Yeah? You go back out to the highway and take a right. There's a light about 2 miles down, and you'll see the sign for the on-ramp right after that." "Right at the highway, 2 miles. Sign for the on-ramp," Marcus repeated, nodding slow like he was committing it to memory. "I appreciate that." "Sure," she said. "No problem." Her eyes flicked past him, toward the hallway at the back, where the restroom sign hung crooked on its little chain, and Marcus caught the way her jaw tightened when she did it. She was counting seconds. He knew that look, too. A person only watched a door like that when they were waiting for something bad to walk back through it. He could have turned and walked away right then. Would have been the safe thing. The careful thing. Get his information and go. But he'd learned a long time ago that some doors only opened once, and if you didn't walk through them right then, they closed for good. He leaned down just slightly, resting one hand on the back of the booth across from her, keeping his body loose and unthreatening, no different than a man passing the time before hitting the road. "That thing you did with your hand a minute ago," he said, quiet. So quiet it barely carried past the space between them. "Fingers folded over your thumb. My sister taught me that signal 15 years back. Or I guess I should say, I taught it to her. And she used it on me one night when she couldn't say the words out loud." Maddie's face went pale, her mouth opening slightly like she wanted to deny it, explain it away, tell him he was imagining things. But nothing came out. "I'm not here to make trouble for you," Marcus said before she could find her voice. "I'm not asking you anything, and you don't owe me one word of explanation. But I want you to know something. I run with some people. Good people. We've helped folks before who needed to disappear safe and quiet. No questions asked. No strings on it. If you ever get to a place where you need that, there's a number you can call." He reached into his jacket pocket, slow and unhurried, and drew out a plain white card. No name printed on it. Nothing but a phone number written in careful blue ink across the front. He set it on the table beside her coffee cup, not sliding it toward her exactly, just leaving it there like it was nothing at all, like a receipt or a napkin someone had forgotten. "That's all," he said, straightening up. "You don't have to do a thing with it. But it's yours now?" Down the hallway, a door creaked open, and the sound of footsteps started back toward the booth. Unhurried, confident, the footsteps of a man who never once imagined the world moving without his say-so. Marcus didn't rush. He gave Maddie one last look, something steady and calm in his eyes. The kind of look that said, "I see you," without a single word attached to it. And then he turned and walked back toward the counter, easy as anything, just an old biker finishing his coffee before hitting the road. Trent slid back into the booth across from Maddie a few seconds later, straightening his shirt with 2 short tugs before he sat. "Who was that?" he asked, glancing toward Marcus's back at the counter. "Nobody," Maddie said, her hand closing quietly over the little white card and drawing it into her lap. "Just asking for directions." Maddie sat on the edge of the bed, the door half closed, her jacket balled up in her lap like something she could hide inside of. Her thumb found the little bump the card made through the fabric of the pocket, and she pressed on it again and again, like she was checking to make sure it hadn't disappeared. Down the hall, she could hear Trent's voice, low and clipped, the way it got when he thought she was somewhere else, out of earshot, not paying attention. She wasn't supposed to be listening. She knew that. But she found she couldn't stop. No, that number's not right," Trent was saying. "I told you already. It needs to match what's on the Hargrove invoice, not the one we sent last month. If it doesn't match, that's a problem." A pause. Maddie held her breath without meaning to. "I don't care whose fault it is," Trent said, his voice dropping even lower, sharper now. "Just fix it before Friday. If Dad's guy looks at this and it doesn't line up, we're both in trouble. You understand me?" Maddie's fingers tightened around the jacket. She'd heard him talk like this before. Dozens of times, probably, over the last year. Numbers, accounts, invoices. She used to tune it out completely, the way you tune out a television playing in another room. Background noise that didn't belong to her. It was just Trent's work, she'd told herself. Construction stuff. Boring. Not her business. But lately she'd started noticing things. The way he'd hand her a stack of papers some nights and ask her to, "Just enter these into the spreadsheet, babe. It's nothing. Just cleaning up some old records." The vendor names that never quite matched the addresses. The way he got twitchy, almost mean, if she asked too many questions about what she was actually typing. She thought about the manila folder in the bottom drawer of the desk in the spare room. The one with her name typed neatly at the top of 3 different pages, next to numbers that didn't mean anything to her when she'd first seen them. But now, sitting here, replaying his voice in her head, they meant something. They meant her name was on things. Things that maybe weren't supposed to have any name on them at all, least of all hers. Her stomach turned over slow, like a stone rolling down a hill it couldn't stop rolling down. She'd spent the whole day thinking the danger in her life had a shape she understood. Trent's temper, Trent's control, the way he watched her at the diner, at the grocery store, at her own sister's birthday dinner, like she was a dog he expected to run off if he didn't keep the leash short enough. That was the fear she knew. That was the fear she had a shape for. But this was different. This fear didn't have Trent's face on it. It had numbers, ledgers, a name typed neatly that happened to be hers. She thought of the biker's eyes again, steady, calm, seeing straight through her like she was made of glass. I'm not asking you anything, and you don't owe me one word of explanation." He'd thought he understood what her signal meant. He'd thought it meant one thing, the same thing his sister must have meant 15 years ago. And maybe it did mean that, a little. Maybe it meant 100 small things all folded together, fear on top of fear on top of fear, until she couldn't even tell anymore which one scared her most. Trent's voice had gone quiet in the other room. She heard him say something short, something final, and then the small click of his phone going down on the counter. Maddie sat very still, listening to her own heartbeat. She thought about prison. She didn't know if that was really what waited for her, but the thought had planted itself somewhere deep and wouldn't leave. She thought about her name on those pages. She thought about walking into some office one day, being asked questions she didn't have good answers for. She pulled her jacket into her lap all the way now, both arms wrapped around it like a child holding a stuffed animal, and slipped her fingers into the pocket until she felt the card again, the stiff corner of it pressing into her palm. She didn't know yet what she would say. She didn't know if the man with the kind eyes could really help her, or if this was a mistake bigger than any mistake she'd made yet. But she knew, sitting there in the dark with Trent's footsteps starting down the hallway again, that she was going to call the number. The gas station sat off the highway like something forgotten, a single light buzzing over the pumps. The little store behind it dark except for a strip of fluorescent light near the register. No cars but Marcus's motorcycle and Maddie's old sedan, parked at a careful distance from each other, like two animals unsure if the other one bit. Marcus stood by his bike, arms crossed loose over his chest, not looking at his phone, not looking impatient, just waiting. He'd gotten there 20 minutes early, on purpose, wanting to be the one already settled when she pulled in, so she wouldn't feel like she was walking into anything sudden. Maddie's car rolled up slow, headlights sweeping across the pavement before cutting off. She sat inside for a second too long before she opened the door, like she was gathering something up inside herself, some kind of courage she wasn't sure she had enough of. She walked over with her arms wrapped around her middle, even though the night wasn't cold. Marcus didn't move toward her. He let her close the distance on her own time. "Hey," he said, quiet. "You doing okay?" Maddie shook her head, then laughed, a small broken sound that didn't have any humor in it. "No, not really." "That's all right too," Marcus said. "You don't gotta be okay right now." She looked at him for a long moment, like she was trying to figure out if she could trust the calm in his voice, if it was real or just something people said. Whatever she found there must have been enough, because her shoulders started to shake. Just slightly at first, and then all at once, like a dam breaking somewhere she couldn't hold back anymore. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice cracking down the middle. "And I don't think it's what you think it is." Marcus didn't say anything. He just stood there, steady, letting her get to it in her own time. "I know how this looks," Maddie said, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. "I know you saw me at that table, and you probably thought, I don't know, that he hits me or that he's gonna hurt me. And maybe someday he would. I don't know. But that's not why I called you." Marcus's brow creased slightly, but he kept quiet. "It's not him hurting me that I'm scared of," Maddie said, and the words came faster now, tumbling out like they'd been trapped behind her teeth for months. "It's what I've been helping him do, his family's construction business. There's invoices, vendor accounts, and none of it's real. None of it. He's been moving money through fake companies for over a year. And I didn't know at first. I swear I didn't know. He just had me typing numbers into a spreadsheet. And then it was more than that. And then my name was on things, actual documents. And I didn't stop him because I didn't understand what he was doing. And then I did understand, and I still didn't stop because I was scared of him. And now I don't know how to just walk away without everybody thinking I did this too, because I did do it. Some of it. I did some of it. Her voice broke apart on the last words, and she pressed both hands over her mouth like she could push the confession back inside herself. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, heavy and strange. He'd been so sure. 15 years carrying his sister's face in his memory, the shape of her fear, had made him certain he understood exactly what he was looking at back at that diner table. A woman trapped by a man's fists, or the threat of them. He'd built the whole picture in his head before she'd said a single word. But this was something else. Something twisted up in paperwork and fear of prison instead of fear of bruises. A trap made of numbers instead of hands. "Hey," he said softly, stepping closer, slow, careful. "Look at me." Maddie lifted her wet eyes to his. "I've pulled people out of worse," Marcus said. "A lot worse. This ain't the end of the road for you, you hear me? It's just a different road than I thought we were walking." Maddie let out a breath that shook the whole way out of her, like she'd been holding it for a year. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. "I know," Marcus said. "That's all right. You don't have to know. Not tonight." There was an old pickup truck parked at the edge of the lot, left there by someone who worked the night shift somewhere, probably. Marcus nodded toward it. "Come sit," he said. "Standing here in the middle of a parking lot isn't going to help either of us think straight." Maddie followed him, and they settled onto the tailgate, the metal cool under them, the buzzing light from the gas station pumps casting everything in a pale, tired glow. She wrapped her arms around herself again, and Marcus sat a careful distance away, giving her room to breathe. For a while, neither of them said anything. Maddie cried quietly, the kind of crying that comes when a person has been holding something in for so long that letting it out feels like it might break something loose inside them. Marcus let her. He'd learned a long time ago that some tears needed space, not words. When she finally wiped her face and took a shaky breath, he spoke, keeping his voice low and even. "I know a man named Walt," Marcus said. "Walt Higgins. Retired now, but he spent 30-some years doing forensic accounting. You know what that is?" Maddie shook her head, sniffling. "It's like being a detective, but with numbers instead of fingerprints," Marcus said. "He can look at a mess of paperwork and find the thread that unravels the whole thing. He's helped some folks connected to the club before. People who got tangled up in things they didn't mean to get tangled up in. Good people who made bad choices because somebody else backed them into a corner." Maddie looked at him, her eyes red and swollen, disbelief flickering across her face. "You think he could help me?" "I know he could," Marcus said, "but I want you to hear something first, and I need you to really hear it, not just nod along." She waited, watching him. "Leaving Trent and fixing this mess with the money," Marcus said. "Those are two different fights. You understand? You don't have to solve both of them at once. You don't have to have it all figured out tonight or tomorrow or even next week. First thing is getting you safe and getting you some distance from him. Second thing is figuring out how to make this right without you going down for something he built." "But what if I already went down for it?" Maddie whispered. "What if it's too late?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "It ain't too late. Walt's helped people who came to him in worse shape than this. There's ways to fix it. Cooperating, showing you were pressured, proving what was really going on. But we gotta do it careful, and we gotta do it smart. That's what Walt's for." Maddie stared down at her hands, twisting them together in her lap. "I'm so scared," she said. "I don't even know how to explain how scared I am." "You don't gotta explain it," Marcus said. "I can see it plain as day, but scared doesn't mean stuck. Scared just means you care about how this turns out. That's not a bad thing. That's the thing that's gonna get you through it." She looked over at him, something in her face softening just slightly, like a window cracking open after being shut too long. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll meet him." Walt? Marcus nodded, relief settling into his chest. Good. I'll set it up quiet, somewhere safe. Nobody's gonna know but the people who need to. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small phone, plain and black, the kind you could buy off a rack without anybody asking your name. He held it out to her. Burner phone, he said. Nothing tying it to you. You call me on this, not your regular one. Trent doesn't need to know anything about what we're doing. Maddie took it carefully, turning it over in her hands like it was something fragile. Thank you, she whispered. I don't even know why you're doing this. Because somebody did it for my sister once, Marcus said simply, and I promised myself I'd do it for the next person who needed it. Maddie nodded, tucking the phone into her jacket pocket like a secret. A few minutes later, she climbed back into her car, and Marcus watched her taillights disappear down the dark highway. Driving home, Maddie felt something she hadn't felt in over a year, something small and fragile but unmistakably real. Hope. 3 days later, Maddie sat in the passenger seat of Marcus's truck, watching small houses roll by. Her hands were folded tight in her lap. She had told Trent she was meeting her cousin for lunch. The lie had come easier than she expected, and that scared her almost as much as everything else. You okay? Marcus asked, glancing over at a stop sign. No, Maddie said honestly, but I'm here. That's enough for today. Walt Higgins lived in a small brick house at the end of a quiet street, the kind of place with a neat lawn and a wind chime hanging by the front door. When he opened the door, Maddie saw a man who looked nothing like what she'd pictured. She'd imagined someone sharp and serious, maybe in a suit. Instead, Walt wore a soft flannel shirt and reading glasses pushed up on his gray hair. His eyes were kind behind thick lenses, the kind of eyes that had seen a lot of trouble and learned patience because of it. You must be Maddie, Walt said, stepping aside to let her in. Come on back. I made coffee if you want some. The house smelled like old paper and cinnamon. Walt led them down a short hallway into a small office that had clearly once been a spare bedroom. Bookshelves lined the walls, stuffed with binders and folders, all labeled in neat handwriting. A single lamp lit the desk, casting a warm yellow glow over stacks of paper. Sit, sit, Walt said, gesturing to 2 chairs across from his desk. Marcus took the one by the door, giving Maddie the closer seat. His presence was steady, like a wall at her back. Walt settled into his own chair with a small grunt, the kind old joints make. Marcus tells me you've gotten yourself tangled up in something you didn't build, he said. That true? Maddie nodded, throat tight. I didn't know what I was doing at first. Not really. Trent said it was just paperwork, vendor stuff for the business. Then later, when I figured out what it was, I was already in too deep to say no. Walt nodded slowly, not with judgment, just understanding. That's how it usually goes. Nobody walks into fraud with their eyes wide open. It creeps up on people. A favor here, a signature there. Before you know it, you're standing in the middle of something you never meant to build. Have you helped people like me before? Maddie asked quietly. More than a few, Walt said. Wives, sons, employees, people who got caught in somebody else's scheme because they trusted the wrong person, or they were scared, or both. The law can be harsh, but it also cares about intent. Somebody who was pressured and cooperates looks very different to a prosecutor than somebody who planned the whole thing. So what do I need to do? Walt leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. We need proof. Real proof, not just your word. Invoices that don't match real work. Vendor names that don't exist. Bank transfers that go in circles. If Trent's been laundering money through fake companies, there's a paper trail somewhere, even if he thinks he's covered his tracks. People like him always leave something behind. Maddie felt her stomach twist. He keeps most of that stuff locked in his office. I've seen some of it, but I don't have access to all of it. That's all right, Walt said. We start small. You'd be surprised what adds up. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small notebook, plain and black, the kind you could buy at any drugstore. He slid it across to her. This is yours now, he said. Keep it somewhere Trent won't look. Write down anything you remember, anything you see, dates, numbers, names of companies that sound made up. If you can photograph documents without him noticing, do it, but only when it's safe. I'd rather have less evidence and you safe than more evidence and you hurt. Maddie took the notebook carefully, feeling its weight settle into her palm like something solid to hold on to. And when you need to move around town, Marcus added from his chair, somebody from the club will be nearby. Not close enough to spook anybody, just close enough that you're never really alone out there. Maddie looked between the two men, something steadying in her chest for the first time in a long while. The first night, Maddie waited until Trent's breathing turned slow and even. She lay stiff beside him, counting the minutes on the ceiling. When she was sure he was really asleep, she slid out from under the covers, careful not to let the mattress creak. His briefcase sat by the office door downstairs, like always. She crept down in her socks, skipping the third stair because it groaned. The house was dark except for the glow of the streetlight through the front window. Her heart pounded so loud she thought it might wake him through the floor. She used her phone on the lowest brightness setting. No flash, just enough light to read by. Her hands shook as she flipped through invoices, snapping pictures of anything with a company name she didn't recognize. Riverside Supply, Coastal Materials Group. Names that sounded real but meant nothing when she tried to picture an actual building, an actual person answering the phone. Upstairs, the bed creaked. Maddie froze, phone halfway to a page, breath caught in her throat. She counted to 10. 20. Nothing. Just Trent shifting in his sleep. She let her breath out slow and kept going. By the end of that first week, she had a system. She worked her temp job during the day, answering phones at an insurance office downtown, the kind of dull work that let her mind wander to numbers and names. After her shift, she would drive the long way home, stopping at a coffee shop 2 towns over where Walt met her in a back booth, reading glasses pushed up on his head, a legal pad in front of him. "This one," Walt said one afternoon, tapping a photo on her phone screen with his pen. "Riverside Supply. Look here, the invoice number sequence doesn't match anything else in your files. It's like someone made these up out of order." "Is that bad?" Maddie asked. "It's good," Walt said, and something in his voice made her chest loosen just slightly. "It's exactly what we need. Keep going. You're doing better than you think." She held on to that on the drive home, repeating it in her head like a small prayer. But Thursday night, everything nearly fell apart. Trent had gone to bed early, complaining of a headache, and Maddie waited longer than usual, her nerves stretched thin. When she finally crept downstairs, she found his briefcase left open on the kitchen table instead of by the office door. Careless. Or maybe not. Maybe he was testing her. She had just lifted a folder out when she heard his footsteps on the stairs. Her whole body went cold. There was no time to close the briefcase, no time to hide the folder. She shoved it back in place, fumbled the papers straight, and grabbed the first thing her hand touched, a pen sitting near the edge of the table. "What are you doing?" Trent's voice was rough with sleep, but his eyes were sharp, moving from her face to the briefcase to her hand. "Looking for a pen," Maddie said, holding it up, forcing her voice steady. I wanted to write something down before I forgot it. Sorry, I didn't mean to touch your stuff." Trent stared at her a long moment. She made herself hold his gaze, made herself breathe normal, made her face into the same tired, harmless expression she'd practiced for a year now. "Whatever," he muttered finally, turning back toward the stairs. "Come to bed." She followed him up, pen still in her hand, legs trembling so hard she had to grip the railing. It wasn't until he was asleep again, an hour later, that she allowed herself to move. She slipped into the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the tub with the burner phone Marcus had given her, the one hidden inside an old tampon box under the sink where Trent would never look. Her fingers shook so badly, it took 3 tries to dial. Marcus picked up on the second ring, his voice low and calm, like he'd been expecting the call. "Maddie, you okay?" "He almost caught me," she whispered, tears finally breaking loose. "I don't know how I didn't fall apart. I don't know how much longer I can do this." "Hey," Marcus said gently. "Breathe. You're okay. You're safe right now, that's what matters. Tell me what happened." She told him, voice shaking, and he listened without interrupting, the way he always did. "You did good," he said when she finished. "You kept your head. That's not luck, Maddie, that's you, and you're not doing this alone. Not for one single second. You understand me?" The coffee shop Marcus picked was 3 towns over, the same one where Walt met her. But this time when Maddie walked in, Marcus was already sitting at a back booth with 2 people she'd never seen before. The man was huge. Not just tall, but built like something out of a movie, arms thick as tree trunks, a gray beard trimmed close, wearing a leather vest with patches she didn't recognize. He looked like he could snap a phone book in half without trying. But when he saw her walk in, his whole face changed, crinkling into a smile that softened everything about him. "You must be Maddie," he said, standing up halfway, like he wasn't sure if he should offer his hand or not. "I'm Sam. Everybody calls me Big Sam, on account of, well..." He gestured at himself and shrugged, like it was obvious. The woman next to him laughed, a warm, easy sound. She was maybe in her 50s, silver threaded through dark hair pulled back in a loose braid, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She had kind eyes, the kind that looked like they'd seen a lot of life and decided to be gentle anyway. "I'm Donna," she said, patting the seat beside her. "Sit down, honey. You look like you could use a good meal and a minute to breathe." Maddie slid into the booth, glancing at Marcus, who gave her a small nod like everything was fine, like this was exactly where she was supposed to be. "Sam and Donna are going to be close by," Marcus said, keeping his voice low even though the shop was mostly empty. "They found a place across the street from your building, signed the lease yesterday under Donna's maiden name, told the landlord they're newlyweds looking for a quiet spot." He almost smiled at that. Nobody's gonna look twice at an older couple keeping to themselves. "Across the street?" Maddie's stomach did something strange, a flip that wasn't fear. "3rd floor, corner unit," Donna said. "Good view of your parking lot. Sam already figured out you can see your bedroom window from our kitchen if the blinds are ever open." She said it so plainly, like she was talking about the weather, not the fact that 2 strangers were about to spend their days quietly watching over Maddie's life. "I don't know what to say," Maddie whispered. Her throat felt tight. "You don't have to say anything," Sam said, his big voice gentle now. "We're not here to get in your way. We're just here so you're not carrying this whole thing by yourself anymore. That's it. That's the whole job." Maddie looked down at her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. For over a year, she'd felt like she was standing on a rope over open water, and nobody even knew the rope was there, let alone that it was fraying. And now, suddenly, there were people standing underneath her, ready to catch her if she fell. "Thank you," she managed. "I don't know how to thank you enough." Eat your pancakes, Donna said, sliding a menu toward her. That's how you thank us. You look like you haven't eaten a real meal in a week. Maddie almost laughed, and it surprised her, the sound coming out rusty, like she'd forgotten how. They talked for a while longer, Sam telling a story about the time he tried to parallel park his motorcycle and nearly took out a mailbox. Donna swatting his arm and correcting the details, both of them pulling Maddie into the warmth of their bickering like she'd always been part of it. As they were getting ready to leave, Donna reached over and squeezed Maddie's hand across the table, her palm warm and rough, like someone who'd worked with her hands her whole life. You know, Donna said, studying Maddie's face with something soft in her eyes, you remind me a lot of my daughter. Same stubborn look when she's scared but won't admit it. She smiled, a little sad, a little proud. She's grown now, lives up north, but watching you just now, the way you're trying so hard to be brave, it's like looking right at her. Maddie didn't know what to say to that. Sunday, Donna continued, like it was already decided. We're having a cookout at the clubhouse. Nothing fancy, just burgers and too much potato salad. You should come. Meet everybody properly. I think you'll like it there. Maddie looked at Marcus, who just nodded, like this was the most natural thing in the world. I'd like that, Maddie said quietly. I really would. The clubhouse sat at the end of a long gravel road, a big metal building with motorcycles lined up out front like soldiers standing at attention. Maddie's hands were sweating on the steering wheel as she parked her car between two trucks that looked like they cost more than her whole apartment building. She sat there for a minute, just breathing, telling herself she could still turn around. Then the front door swung open and Marcus stepped out, waving like she was late for something important. You made it, he called out. Come on, food's almost ready and Sam's already burned one batch of burgers trying to talk instead of watching the grill. Maddie got out of the car, smoothing down her shirt, and followed him inside. The place smelled like charcoal smoke and fresh-cut grass. There were maybe 30 people scattered around a big open yard behind the building, kids running between picnic tables, someone's dog chasing a frisbee, music playing low from a speaker propped in a window. It didn't look scary at all. It looked like a family reunion. Maddie, Donna's voice rang out across the yard, and she came hurrying over, wiping her hands on an apron tied around her waist. You found it okay? These roads can be tricky if you don't know where you're going. I found it, Maddie said, managing a real smile this time. Donna pulled her into a hug like they'd known each other for years, then steered her toward the picnic tables, introducing her to person after person. There was a woman named Gail who made the potato salad Donna had mentioned, a quiet young guy named Pete who fixed motorcycles for a living, an older man everyone called Pops who told Maddie she had good taste when she picked a seat near the shade. Nobody looked at her like she was a stranger. Nobody asked why she was there or what her story was. They just made room for her, like she'd always belonged. There she is, Marcus said, walking over with a woman at his side. She was maybe in her early 40s, flour dusted on her jeans, her dark hair pulled up in a messy knot. Maddie, this is my wife, Carol. Carol's eyes were warm, the same kind of steady warmth Maddie had seen in Marcus. I've heard so much about you, she said, taking Maddie's hand in both of hers. Marcus doesn't talk much about work stuff, but when he does, I know it matters. I run the bakery downtown, the one with the blue awning. You'll have to stop by sometime. First cinnamon rolls on the house. I'd like that, Maddie said, and she meant it. They ate at long tables under a big oak tree, plates piled high with burgers and corn, and too much potato salad, just like Donna promised. Maddie found herself laughing at Sam's stories again, at the way Pete flushed red when Gail teased him about a girl he liked, at the easy rhythm of people who trusted each other completely. For the first time in longer than she could remember, nobody was watching her, waiting for her to slip up. Later, when the sun started sinking low and most people had drifted off to smaller conversations, Marcus sat down next to her at the edge of the yard, 2 paper plates of pie balanced in his hands. He handed one to her. "I want to tell you something," he said, his voice quieter now. "About my sister." Maddie looked at him, waiting. "Her name's Elena. 15 years ago, she was married to a man who scared her the same way you're scared now. Different kind of scared, but scared all the same." He turned his fork over in his hands, not quite looking at her. "It took her a long time to leave, longer than it should have. But when she finally did, this club, these people, they helped her disappear for a while, helped her get back on her feet." "What happened to her?" Maddie asked softly. Marcus smiled, and something in his face eased, like the memory still brought him relief even after all these years. "She's a nurse now, lives out in Colorado, married to a good man, got 2 kids, a dog that sheds everywhere according to her. She calls me every Sunday just to talk." He looked at Maddie then, steady and sure. "She built a whole life out of the wreckage. You can too." Maddie felt something loosen in her chest, something she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. The apartment was quiet, except for the sound of Trent's breathing, slow and even, coming from the bedroom down the hall. Maddie sat cross-legged on the living room floor, Trent's laptop open in front of her. It screened the only light in the whole dark apartment. Her heart pounded so loud she was sure it would wake him. She had learned his password weeks ago, back when things were still simple between them, back before she understood what she was really looking at every time he asked her to type up an invoice. It still worked. Some small, sad part of her wondered if he'd even bothered to think she might use it against him. She moved the mouse carefully, clicking through folders she'd already checked a dozen times. Nothing new. Just the same vendor files Walt had already helped her understand. The fake companies with names like Bright Path Supply and Cornerstone Materials Group that didn't exist anywhere except on paper. Then she saw it. A folder tucked inside another folder, buried 3 layers deep, named simply Archive Old. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad. She almost didn't open it. Some instinct told her that whatever was inside, it would change things. But she'd come this far. She clicked. The folder bloomed open, and Maddie's breath caught in her throat. There were hundreds of files. Not dozens, hundreds. Invoices going back years, way further than the year she'd been dating Trent. Some of the dates went back 6, 7 years. She scrolled and scrolled, her thumb trembling against the trackpad, and the shell companies kept multiplying. Addresses that led to empty lots. Addresses that were actually storage units. One address, she realized with a cold drop in her stomach, belonged to a laundromat 2 towns over that had closed down years ago. This wasn't just Trent skimming a little off his family's business. This was something much bigger, something that had been running long before she ever walked into his life. Her hands shook so hard, she almost dropped the USB drive Walt had given her, tucked inside a sock in her dresser drawer for exactly this moment. She plugged it into the laptop, watching the little progress bar crawl across the screen, willing it to go faster, terrified every creak of the floorboards was Trent waking up. Copying files, it read. 1,247 files remaining. She almost laughed at the absurdity of it, sitting there in the dark at 2 a.m, praying a computer would hurry up while her boyfriend slept 20 feet away, completely unaware his whole rotten world was being tucked onto a thumb drive the size of her finger. When the bar finally filled and the screen flashed transfer complete, Maddie yanked the drive out, closed everything the way she'd found it, and shut the laptop as quiet as she could manage. She sat there in the dark a moment longer, the drive clenched so tight in her fist it left marks on her palm, and let herself breathe. She didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, she told Trent she had an early shift and needed to leave before he woke. It wasn't a lie. Not really, just not the whole truth. She drove straight to the little diner outside town where Walt liked to get his coffee, the one with cracked vinyl booths and a bell over the door that jingled too loud. Marcus was already there, sitting across from Walt, both of them looking up when she rushed in, still in her work clothes, her hands trembling as she slid into the booth. "I found more," she said, breathless, pushing the drive across the table. "There's so much more than we thought." Walt didn't say anything at first. He just took the drive, pulled a small laptop from his bag like he always did, and plugged it in right there at the table. Maddie watched his face as he scrolled, watched the way his eyebrows drew together, the way his jaw tightened. "Walt?" Marcus said quietly. Walt sat back, took off his glasses, and rubbed his eyes like a man who'd just aged 5 years in 5 minutes. "This isn't just Trent skimming off his daddy's business," Walt said slowly. "This goes back years, multiple counties, shell companies I haven't seen before, addresses tied to businesses that don't exist." He looked up at Maddie, his expression grave. "Honey, this is enough to build a real case. More than enough." He paused, glancing at Marcus. "But it's bigger than Trent," he said. "A lot bigger. Somebody's been helping him keep this quiet for a long, long time." Maddie drove home from the diner with Walt's words sitting heavy in her chest. A lot bigger. Somebody's been helping him keep this quiet for a long, long time. She didn't know what that meant yet, but she knew it meant more danger, not less. By the time she got back to the apartment, she'd rebuilt her face into something calm. She'd gotten good at that. Trent was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee, and he looked up at her the second she walked in the door. "Where were you?" he asked. "Told you, early shift." "Rosalie's doesn't open till 6. Maddie's stomach dropped, but she kept her voice steady. "Prep work. Some mornings Rosalie has me come in early to help with deliveries." It was a lie, but a small one, easy enough to believe. Trent studied her for a long moment, his eyes narrow before he went back to his coffee. She let out the breath she'd been holding once she was safely in the bathroom with the door shut. That was how the days went after that. Small questions that felt like traps. "Where were you? Who were you talking to? Why does your phone die so fast?" He started picking up her phone when she wasn't looking, scrolling through her texts, her call log, her photos. She'd catch him doing it, and he'd just set it back down like nothing happened, like she hadn't seen. "You've been different," he told her one night, standing too close in the kitchen while she washed dishes. Distant, distracted. "I'm tired, Trent. Work's been a lot." "Is that it?" His voice was quiet, but there was something underneath it now, something sharper than before. "Because it feels like you're hiding something." She turned to face him, made herself hold his eyes. "I don't know what you want me to say. I'm right here." He didn't answer. He just watched her, the way a man watches a door he isn't sure is locked. The apartment grew tighter every day, like the walls themselves were closing in around her. She started sleeping worse, jumping at small sounds, the click of his phone charger, the creak of the floor. Every time he left for work, she felt a flood of relief so strong it nearly buckled her knees, and every time she heard his truck in the driveway, her whole body went rigid again. She was living in 2 places at once, the apartment where she pretended everything was fine, and the secret world where Walt was building a case file thick enough to bury Trent for good. She met Marcus twice that week. Quick conversations in gas station parking lots. 5 minutes at most, just long enough to pass along anything new she'd found. He always asked the same thing first. "You doing okay? He hurting you?" And she always told him the same thing back. "Not like that. Just watching me too close." It was on a Thursday night, almost 11, when Trent's phone rang. Maddie was on the couch pretending to watch television, but she saw him glance at the screen and go still. Unknown number. He picked it up and walked into the bedroom, closing the door most of the way, but not all the way, and she could hear the low murmur of his voice through the gap, tight and clipped, none of his usual practiced charm in it. She couldn't make out the words, just the tone. Fear, wrapped up tight inside anger, the way a man sounds when he's cornered and trying not to show it. When he came back out, his face had changed. All the color had drained from it, and his hands weren't quite steady when he set his phone down on the counter. "Trent?" she said carefully. "Everything okay?" He looked at her for a long moment, like he was deciding something. Then he crossed the room and stood over her, closer than she wanted him to be. "People are asking questions," he said, his voice flat and cold in a way she'd never heard before. "About the business, about the accounts." Maddie's heart slammed against her ribs. She kept her face as still as she could manage. "What kind of questions?" "Doesn't matter." His eyes locked onto hers, hard and unblinking. "What matters is you keep your mouth shut, about all of it. You understand me?" Maddie waited until Trent's breathing turned slow, and even beside her before she slipped out of bed. She sat on the bathroom floor with her back against the tub, phone clutched in both hands, and called Marcus. It was almost 1 a.m. He picked up on the second ring. His voice was rough with sleep but sharp underneath, the way it always got when something mattered. "Maddie, what's wrong?" She kept her voice to a whisper, barely more than breath. "Somebody called him tonight. He didn't say who, but he knows people are asking questions. He told me to keep my mouth shut." Her hands were shaking so bad the phone rattled against her ear. "Marcus, I think he's starting to figure it out. I think I ran out of time." There was a pause on the other end. She could hear him moving, the creak of a bed, a low murmur to Carol beside him. "Okay," Marcus said. "Okay, listen to me. You're not alone in this. You hear me?" "I hear you." "I'm gonna call Walt right now. Don't do anything different tomorrow. Same as always. Just breathe." She sat there after he hung up, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the crack of light under the bathroom door like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Marcus called Walt at 1:15 in the morning, and the old man answered like he'd been waiting for it. "She's running out of road," Marcus said. No greeting, no small talk. Trent's spooked. Somebody tipped him off. If he figures out it's her, I don't know what he does next. Walt was quiet for a moment, and Marcus could picture him rubbing his chin the way he did when he was working something out in his head. "The file's solid, Marcus. It's more than solid. I was going to say give it another week to tighten a few loose threads, but if the risk to her just went up, the math changes. So we go now." "We go now." Walt exhaled, and Marcus heard the scrape of a chair, the old man sitting up straighter even at that hour. "I'll call in a favor first thing tomorrow morning. Get us on Alvarez's calendar. Prosecutor like her, she doesn't take walk-ins, but she'll take mine." 2 days, Marcus said. "Can you have it ready in 2 days?" "I'll have it ready tonight if I have to stay up till sunrise doing it. 2 days is nothing. I've waited longer for less important things." Marcus almost smiled, tired as he was. "Thank you, Walt." "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when that girl's name is clean." The next call Marcus made was to Big Sam. "I need you and Donna closer to her place," he said. "Not in her building, just near. Watching the street, watching for his truck, anything that looks wrong." "Say the word and we're there," Sam said, and Marcus could hear Donna's voice in the background already, asking what was going on, already moving around the room like she was packing a bag before she even had the full story. "Word said," Marcus told him. "Starting tomorrow." Back at the apartment, Maddie sat on the closed lid of the toilet long after the call ended, running her thumb over the case of her phone like it might give her some kind of answer. Trent had told her to keep her mouth shut. He didn't know yet that her mouth was the one thing about to bring his whole world down. She didn't sleep that night. Around 3 a.m, she gave up trying and went to the small closet in the spare room, the one Trent never bothered with because it held nothing but old towels and a broken vacuum. She pulled a duffel bag down from the top shelf and began, quietly, methodically, to pack it. A change of clothes, her birth certificate, tucked inside an old paperback so it wouldn't look like anything if he ever searched the bag. A little cash she'd been saving in a coffee tin, folded into a sock. Her toothbrush. A photo of her mother, the only one she had. She didn't know exactly what the next 2 days would bring. She didn't know if she'd need the bag at all. But for the first time since this whole nightmare started, packing it didn't feel like fear. It felt like a decision. Her decision. Made with her own 2 hands in the dark, while Trent slept just down the hall, still believing he was the one in control. The county courthouse sat on the corner of 5th and Main, a squat brick building with white columns that had probably looked grand 50 years ago. Now the paint was peeling near the roofline, and one of the columns had a long crack running down its middle. Maddie stood on the sidewalk outside, staring up at it, the duffel bag long since unpacked and forgotten, replaced now by a plain manila folder clutched against her chest. Walt stood on one side of her, dressed in a pressed button-down shirt despite the summer heat, his reading glasses pushed up on top of his gray hair. Marcus stood on the other side, out of his leather vest for once, wearing a simple gray jacket that Carol had picked out for him that morning. "You look less like you're about to rob the place," she'd told him, straightening his collar. He hadn't argued. "You ready?" Marcus asked Maddie now, his voice low. Maddie's fingers tightened on the folder. Inside were copies of everything. The photographed ledgers, the fake vendor accounts, Walt's careful notes explaining, in plain language, how the money had moved from real accounts into shell companies and back out again, cleaner than it had any right to be. Months of work, condensed into 40 pages. "I'm ready," she said, and was surprised to hear that her voice didn't shake. Inside, the office of the county prosecutor smelled like coffee and old paper. Ms. Alvarez was younger than Maddie expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and hair pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt. She didn't smile when they walked in, just gestured at the 3 chairs across from her desk and said, "Sit." Walt did the talking first, laying out who he was, a retired forensic accountant, 30 years with the state auditor's office before retirement. Alvarez's eyebrows went up slightly at that. Then he slid the folder across the desk. "This is a full accounting of fraudulent invoices filed under Halloway Construction over the past 14 months, Walt said. "Fake vendor names, duplicate account numbers, wire transfers routed through 3 separate shell companies. I've traced every dollar back to its source." Alvarez opened the folder. For a long moment, nobody spoke. She flipped through page after page, her expression unreadable, pausing now and then to study a highlighted line or a photocopied ledger sheet with Walt's neat handwriting in the margins. "Who compiled this?" she finally asked, not looking up. "I did," Maddie said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I took the photos. Walt taught me what to look for. I want to be honest with you, Ms. Alvarez. I was involved. I filed some of these invoices myself. At first, I didn't understand what I was doing. Later, I did, and I kept doing it anyway because I was scared of what would happen if I stopped." Alvarez finally looked up, studying Maddie the way someone studies a puzzle they aren't sure fits together yet. "How scared?" "Scared enough that it took me over a year to work up the courage to walk in here," Maddie said. "But I'm here now, and I brought everything. All of it. Not just the parts that make me look good." For the first time, something shifted in Alvarez's face. Not quite a smile, but close. She flipped through a few more pages, then closed the folder and sat back in her chair. "This is thorough," she said. "More thorough than most cases I get handed by actual detectives." She looked at Walt. "You did good work here." "She did the hard part," Walt said, nodding toward Maddie. "I just taught her where to look." Alvarez tapped the folder once against the desk, thinking. "Given the level of cooperation here, and given that you came forward voluntarily with evidence this detailed, I can tell you right now that your willingness to cooperate will absolutely factor into how this office proceeds. I can't promise you anything is off the table completely. That's not how this works. But this is compelling. This is more than compelling. We'll move on Holloway Construction fast, starting today." Maddie felt something loosen in her chest, a knot that had been sitting there so long she'd forgotten what it felt like without it. "Thank you," she managed to say. When they walked back out onto the sidewalk a few minutes later, the summer air hit Maddie's face, and she stopped, closing her eyes, and let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped inside her for over a year. The call came while Maddie was still sitting in Rosalie's, staring at a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Rosalie herself had come out from behind the counter twice, hovering, refilling water glasses that didn't need refilling, just to be near. It was Carol who burst through the door first, phone in her hand, her face bright with something Maddie hadn't seen in weeks. Real relief. "They got him," Carol said, breathless. "Trent. They arrested him at the office, right there in front of everybody. One of the girls who works at the front desk texted her cousin, who texted Donna. He's in county lockup right now." For a second, Maddie couldn't say anything at all. She just sat there, feeling the words land somewhere deep in her chest, like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward. "He's really gone," she whispered. "He's really gone," Carol repeated, and pulled her into a hug so tight it nearly knocked the wind out of her. Word spread fast after that. By late afternoon, half the club had gathered in Rosalie's parking lot, leaning against their bikes in the slanting gold light, laughing louder than they probably should have. Big Sam had brought a cooler of soda since Rosalie didn't allow anything stronger on her property, and Donna kept squeezing Maddie's shoulder every few minutes, like she needed to check that she was really there, really solid, really safe. Marcus stood a little apart from the noise, arms crossed, watching Maddie with a look on his face that reminded her of a proud father at a graduation. When she caught his eye, he walked over. "You did that," he said. "Not me. Not Walt. You walked in there and you told the truth even when it would have been easier not to." "I couldn't have done any of it without you," Maddie said. Her eyes stung. "You saw me that day. Nobody else did. You saw the signal and you didn't just walk away." Marcus shook his head, but he was smiling, the kind of smile that didn't need words to go with it. The sun dropped lower, turning the parking lot the color of honey, and for a little while, Maddie let herself believe it really was over. She let herself laugh at Big Sam's terrible jokes. She let Donna talk her ear off about some recipe for peach cobbler. She let herself feel, for the first time in over a year, like a person instead of a hostage to her own fear. It didn't last. Marcus's phone rang around 8 that night, just as the group was starting to break up, bikes rumbling to life one by one in the darkening lot. Maddie saw his face change the second he answered it. The easy warmth drained out of him, replaced by something tight and alert. "Slow down, Sam," he said. "Say that again." Maddie stepped closer, her stomach twisting. "State Police," Marcus said, lowering the phone slightly. "They're moving on the clubhouse right now. Sam says there's 4 cruisers out front already, more coming." "Why?" Maddie asked. "What do they think you did?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "I don't know, but it's not good." He was already moving toward his bike, phone still pressed to his ear, barking questions at Sam that Maddie couldn't quite follow. Carol appeared beside her, her earlier joy replaced by a stiff, frightened stillness. "Marcus," Carol called after him. "Marcus, wait, let me come with you." "Stay here," he said, not unkindly, but firm. "Both of you. I need to see what's happening." He was gone within minutes, tail light disappearing down the dark highway, and the party that had filled the parking lot just an hour before scattered into worried clusters. Phones out, voices low. Maddie sat in Carol's car outside the diner, waiting, her hands pressed flat against her knees to keep them from shaking. Carol kept dialing Marcus's number, getting nothing but his voicemail each time. It was nearly 11 when Carol's phone finally buzzed, and her whole body went rigid as she read the screen. "What?" Maddie asked. "What is it?" Carol's voice came out barely above a whisper. "They arrested him, at the house. Marcus is under arrest." The morning light came in weak and gray through the diner windows, nothing like the honey gold of the night before. Maddie sat alone in the corner booth, the same one she used to sit in with Trent, back when smiling was something she had to work at instead of something that came easy. Now the smile was gone again. In its place was a hollow, sick feeling that sat in her stomach like a stone. The newspaper was spread out on the table in front of her, the pages still smelling faintly of ink. She had read the headlines so many times the words had stopped making sense, then started making too much sense, then stopped again. Motorcycle club tied to local fraud scheme. Arrests made. There was a photo of the clubhouse, yellow tape strung across the front porch where Maddie had eaten Donna's peach cobbler just 2 weeks before. There was a smaller photo of Marcus, an old mugshot from years back that made him look meaner than he was, colder than he was. The article didn't say much that was true. It said investigators believed the club had coerced a local woman into laundering money. It said Marcus Reyes was being held on charges related to witness intimidation and financial fraud. It didn't say anything about how he'd slid a card across a table in this very diner weeks ago and asked for nothing in return. Maddie pressed her palms against her eyes until she saw white spots. This was her fault. If she'd never called that number. If she'd never let Marcus get involved. If she'd just found some other way out. Some way that didn't drag a good man and his whole family down with her. Rosalie was behind the counter, moving slower than usual, throwing worried glances over at Maddie every few minutes, but not coming over yet. She seemed to know Maddie needed a minute. Maddie's phone buzzed against the table. Donna's name lit up the screen. Maddie's hand shook as she answered it. "Donna?" "Hey, honey." Donna's voice sounded thin, stretched tight like a wire about to snap. Maddie had never heard her sound like that before. Donna was always the loud one, the one who laughed too hard at Sam's jokes and hugged too tight. This voice belonged to someone else. "I wanted you to hear it from me before you saw it anywhere else." "I already saw the paper," Maddie said quietly. Donna made a sound that was half sigh, half sob. "They're not giving him bail. Judge said something about flight risk, given what they're saying about the club. Sam talked to the lawyer this morning. They said it could be weeks before anything moves. Weeks, Maddie. Weeks? Maddie repeated, the word tasting like ash. I know it's a lot, Donna said. I know, but listen to me. We are not giving up on him. You hear me? Sam and I, we've known Marcus 20 years. He has pulled people out of fires, actual fires, honey, and he has never once asked for a single thing back. We are not about to let some crooked deputy paint him as a criminal. This is my fault, Maddie said, her voice breaking. If I hadn't called him that night— Don't you dare! Donna cut in, sharper now. Don't you dare say that to me. Marcus made his choice a long time ago, way before you called him. He chose this life a long time ago, choosing to see people when nobody else would. You didn't put those cuffs on him. Somebody else did that, and we are going to find out who. Maddie didn't have the strength to argue. She just nodded into the phone, even though Donna couldn't see her, and murmured something like agreement before they hung up. The silence after the call felt heavier than before. Maddie stared down at the newspaper again, at Marcus's cold, unfamiliar mugshot smile, and felt the guilt rise up in her throat like something she might actually be sick from. That was when she heard the booth creak across from her, and looked up to find Rosalie easing herself into the seat, 2 cups of coffee in her hands, setting one down gently in front of Maddie without being asked. Rosalie's eyes were kind, but there was something steady and serious in them too, something that made Maddie sit up a little straighter. You know, Rosalie said quietly, I remember the first day you came in here with that boy. Maddie's throat tightened. Rosalie, I don't think I can talk about this right now. I saw you, Rosalie went on, as if Maddie hadn't spoken. Tapping your fingers on that coffee cup like your life depended on it. I didn't understand what it meant then, but Marcus did. He was sitting right there at the counter, and I saw his face change in the mirror. I saw him decide, right then and there, that he wasn't going to just sit and eat his eggs and mind his own business. Maddie's eyes filled with tears she couldn't hold back anymore. He knew what he was risking, Rosalie said, her voice soft but firm. A man like that, wearing those colors, walking up to a table where some controlling boyfriend could make trouble? He knew exactly what that looked like to the world. He did it anyway, because he saw you drowning, and he wasn't going to pretend he didn't. Maddie wiped at her face with the back of her hand, the tears coming faster now. So you tell me, Rosalie said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. What kind of person would you be if you let that go to waste now? If you ran from this fight after everything he gave up to get you out of yours? Maddie sat there for a long moment, feeling something shift inside her chest, the guilt hardening slowly into something else. Something with edges. Something with purpose. She wiped her eyes one more time, sat up straight, and looked at Rosalie with a steadiness that hadn't been there a few minutes before. I'm not running, Maddie said. I'm going to fight for him. Whatever it takes. Walt's office sat above an old hardware store on 5th Street, up a narrow staircase that creaked with every step. Maddie had been there enough times now that she didn't need directions anymore. She took the stairs 2 at a time, a folder of copied documents pressed tight against her chest, like it might blow away in the wind. Walt was already at his desk when she pushed open the door. He looked up, and she saw the newspaper folded on the corner of his desk, too. He'd read it already. I was wondering when you'd show up, he said, taking off his reading glasses and rubbing his eyes. Donna called me an hour ago, told me you weren't going to sit still. I can't, Maddie said, dropping into the chair across from him. I won't. Marcus is sitting in a cell because of me, and I'm not going to just wait around for a lawyer to figure this out. There has to be something in Trent's records, something we missed. Walt studied her for a moment, and something in his face softened. All right then. Let's get to work. They spread the ledgers across his desk, the same ones Maddie had spent weeks learning to read under his patient instruction. Rows of numbers that used to look like nonsense now told her a story, one she understood in her bones. Shell companies, vendor names that didn't correspond to any actual business, payments looping back through accounts that led nowhere and everywhere at once. The prosecution's whole new theory hinges on the idea that Marcus and his club had some financial stake in this, Walt said, pulling a legal pad toward him. Which means somewhere there has to be a paper trail connecting them to the money. Except there isn't one, because it isn't true. So if it's not true, Maddie said, then whoever planted that idea had to invent something, or twist something that was already there. Walt nodded slowly. That's where we start. We go back through every shell company Trent used, and we cross-reference the registration documents against public financial disclosures. Local officials have to file those every year. It's public record if you know where to look. They worked for hours. Walt pulled up state business registration archives on his ancient desktop computer, the fan inside rattling every time it loaded a new page. Maddie sat beside him with a legal pad of her own, writing down company names, filing dates, registered agents. It was slow, tedious work, the kind that made her eyes ache and her neck stiff, but she didn't stop. Every name they cleared felt like one step closer to Marcus. She noticed, somewhere around the third hour, that Walt's hands had started to shake. Not badly. Just a small tremor as he typed. A slight hesitation before he clicked on each new link. "Walt," she said gently. "You okay?" He gave a tired laugh, though there wasn't much humor in it. "I spent 30 years chasing down white-collar criminals who never once knew my name. Now I'm digging into a deputy sheriff's finances at midnight in a rented office above a hardware store. Forgive me if my nerves are a little rattled." "We can stop," Maddie said. "If it's too much." "No." Walt's voice was firm. "Marcus has done more for people in this town than anyone gives him credit for. I'm not stopping now. I just needed you to know I'm human, that's all." She reached over and squeezed his arm, the way Donna had squeezed her hand that morning, passing the same strength forward. It was close to midnight when Walt pulled up another registration page, one for a company called Palmetto Vendor Solutions, one of the smaller shell accounts Trent had used to funnel money through a fake supply order. Walt scrolled down to the registered agent section, the place where the name of whoever filed the paperwork would show up. He went still. "Walt?" Maddie leaned in closer, her heart suddenly pounding. "What is it?" He didn't answer right away. He just pointed at the screen, his finger trembling slightly as it hovered over a single line of text. "Registered agent, Harold J. Ferris." Maddie stared at the name, reading it over and over, waiting for it to rearrange itself into something else, something that made sense. It didn't. "That's him," she whispered. "That's Deputy Ferris." Ms. Alvarez's office smelled like coffee and old paper. Maddie sat stiff in the chair across from the wide oak desk, her knee bouncing under the table. Walt sat beside her, calm as always, a thin folder resting on his lap like it weighed nothing at all, even though Maddie knew exactly how much it carried. Ms. Alvarez read through the papers slowly, her face giving nothing away. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and gray streaks running through dark hair pulled back tight. Maddie had met her once before, the day she'd turned over the evidence against Trent. Back then, Alvarez had been skeptical, careful, testing every word Maddie said. Now she looked tired in a different way, like someone carrying more than she wanted to admit. "Walk me through it again," Alvarez said, not looking up from the page. From the beginning. Walt cleared his throat. Palmetto Vendor Solutions was one of the shell companies Trent used to move money through fake invoices. Standard setup, nothing special about it on the surface. But the registered agent listed on the state filing is Harold Ferris. Deputy Ferris? Maddie added, her voice steadier than she felt. He's not just some name on a piece of paper. He's the one who came after Marcus. He's the one who said the club coerced me. Alvarez finally looked up. You understand what you're telling me. You're saying a sworn deputy has financial ties to the same fraud scheme that put Trent Holloway behind bars, and that same deputy fabricated evidence against a completely separate party to protect himself. Yes, Maddie said. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation, Walt said, sliding the folder across the desk. It's documentation, public record. We didn't twist anything. We just followed the numbers, same as we did with Trent. Alvarez studied the papers again, flipping through slowly this time, her jaw tightening as she reached the registration page with Ferris's name typed plainly across it. She sat back in her chair and rubbed her temple. If this checks out, she said quietly, it means one of my own colleagues used his badge to protect a criminal enterprise, and then framed an innocent man to cover his tracks. It checks out, Maddie said. I know it does. Alvarez was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded, slow and deliberate. I'll have my investigators pull the financials independently. Quietly. If Ferris gets even a whisper that we're looking into him, he'll bury whatever's left before we can find it. How long? Maddie asked. I can't promise a timeline, but I'll move as fast as I can. Alvarez looked at her, something softer passing behind her eyes. You did good work here, Ms. Kessler. Both of you did. Maddie nodded, but the words didn't feel like enough. Not with Marcus still sitting in a cell. They thanked her and stepped out into the hallway, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Maddie's legs felt heavy, the kind of tired that came from sitting up all night with your mind racing faster than your body could keep pace. Walt walked beside her, quiet, letting her have the silence. They were almost to the front doors when Maddie's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Carol. Her stomach dropped before she even answered. Carol, what's wrong? Carol's voice came through cracked and trembling, like she'd been crying for a while before she found the courage to dial. They won't let me see him, Maddie. They're saying he's not allowed visitors right now. Not me, not his lawyer, nobody. What? Why? They won't tell me anything. And it's not just Marcus. They raided the clubhouse again this morning, tore through everything, took more files, more computers. Sam says they're treating this like it's some kind of drug operation. It's not true. None of it's true. Carol's voice broke completely then, dissolving into quiet, ragged sobs. I don't know what to do. I don't know how much more of this he can take, sitting in there, not knowing if anyone's coming. Maddie pressed her hand against the wall, steadying herself. Walt watched her face change, and he didn't need to hear Carol's words to know something had gotten worse. Carol, listen to me, Maddie said, her voice shaking but firm. We found something. Something big. We just brought it to the prosecutor. It's going to take time, but it's real, and it's going to help him. Time, Carol whispered. I don't know if we have time. Maddie closed her eyes, gripping the phone tighter. We'll make time. I promise you, Carol. I'm not stopping. 2 days later, Maddie sat in a small conference room down the hall from Ms. Alvarez's office. The room had no windows, just a long table and 2 investigators across from her, both with notepads and a recorder blinking red between them. Walt sat to her left, his folder now thick with copies, tabs sticking out the sides like little flags. The older investigator, a stocky man named Detective Briggs, folded his hands on the table. "Ms. Kessler, we appreciate you coming in. We know this isn't easy. We just need you to walk us through everything, start to finish. Take your time." Maddie nodded. Her hands were steady now. That surprised her more than anything. "It started at Rosalie's diner," she said. "I was there with Trent. Things were bad between us, worse than anyone knew. I gave a signal without thinking, just tapping my fingers on my coffee cup. I didn't even know if anyone would see it. But Marcus did." She told them everything. The card he'd slid across the table. The night she called the number, sobbing. The gas station meeting where she confessed the truth wasn't abuse, not the way they'd think, but fraud, and how trapped she felt inside it. "Marcus never asked me for anything," she said. "Not money, not information he could use for himself. He just listened. Then he connected me with Walt." The younger investigator, a woman named Reyes, no relation to Marcus, glanced up. "And what exactly did Walt help you with?" "Understanding the documents," Maddie said. "How to read the ledgers, spot the shell companies, know what mattered and what didn't. He taught me like a teacher would. He never touched money either. Not mine, not Trent's, not the club's." Walt slid his folder forward. "I kept records of every meeting," he said. "Dates, times, what we discussed. I've done forensic work for 30 years. I know how these things get twisted if you're not careful, so I made sure everything was documented from day one. You'll see there that not a single financial transaction passed through me or Marcus or anyone in that club. We were never anything more than people trying to help someone get free." Briggs flipped through Walt's folder, comparing it against Maddie's testimony. "And the protection detail? The club following you around?" "They kept me safe," Maddie said. "Big Sam and Donna, they gave me a place to stay when I couldn't be near Trent anymore. Carol fed me more meals than I can count. None of them asked for a cent. None of them wanted anything except to make sure I made it out okay." "Why do you think Deputy Ferris named Marcus specifically?" Reyes asked. Maddie's jaw tightened. "Because Marcus was an easy target. He rides a motorcycle, wears a patch, and people already look at him sideways before they know him. Ferris used that. He needed someone to blame once the fraud investigation got too close to him, and Marcus was standing right there, having done nothing but help me." The investigators exchanged a glance. Briggs made a note, then looked back up. "We're going to need everything. Phone records, bank statements, anything showing money moving in and out of your accounts and the club's accounts during this whole period." "Take whatever you need," Maddie said. "There's nothing to hide. That's the whole point." It took the investigators 3 more hours that afternoon, cross-referencing everything Maddie and Walt had given them against actual bank records pulled under subpoena. Maddie waited in the hallway with Walt, drinking bad coffee from a vending machine, watching the clock crawl. When Briggs finally came out, his face had changed. Not soft, exactly, but something had shifted. "We ran every account," he said. "Yours, Marcus Reyes, Big Sam Whitfield, Donna Whitfield, every club member listed in the file. Not $1 moved between any of you and the fraudulent accounts tied to Trent Holloway. Nothing. Clean as can be." Maddie felt her knees go weak with relief, but Briggs wasn't finished. "We also pulled Ferris's personal accounts," he said. "Found deposits, cash mostly, structured to stay under reporting limits. Timeline lines up almost exactly with the fraud. We've got enough now to move on him." News like that does not stay quiet for long in a small town. By the next morning, everyone at the county building was talking about it in low voices. Deputy Ferris had been placed on administrative leave. 2 investigators had walked into the sheriff's department with a folder full of bank statements, and 20 minutes later, Ferris walked out with his badge and gun sitting in a box, his face gray as ash. Nobody said the word arrest yet, but everybody knew it was coming. Maddie heard about it from Walt, who called her before 8 in the morning, his voice steadier than she'd heard it in weeks. "They pulled him off duty," Walt said. "Alvarez's office confirmed it. It's happening, Maddie. It's really happening." Maddie sat on the edge of her bed, phone pressed to her ear, and let herself breathe for what felt like the first time in days. Later that morning, Ms. Alvarez called her into the office again, this time with better news than Maddie had dared to hope for. "The evidence against Marcus is falling apart," Alvarez said, sliding a folder across her desk. "The so-called witness statements Ferris collected don't hold up. 2 of the people he claimed spoke to him are saying now they never talked to him at all. The financial trail you and Walt gave us proves there's no connection between Marcus's club and Trent's fraud. I've already spoken with the judge's clerk. I think we have a real shot at getting him out on bail today." "Today?" Maddie repeated, her chest tightening with hope. "His lawyer is filing for an emergency bail hearing this afternoon," Alvarez said. "I'm going to make sure the court has everything they need to see this case for what it is. A man who did nothing wrong except help someone." Maddie thanked her more times than she probably needed to, then left the office and drove straight to the clubhouse, an old cinder-block building on the edge of town with a gravel lot and a faded sign out front. She had never been there without Marcus at her side, and walking in now felt strange, like stepping into a home that wasn't quite hers, but close enough to feel welcome. Carol was sitting at a long table in the main room, a cup of coffee in front of her that had long gone cold. Donna sat beside her, one hand resting on Carol's shoulder. Both women looked up when Maddie walked in, and Carol's eyes filled with tears at just the sight of her. "You heard?" Carol asked. "I heard," Maddie said. She sat down across from them. "Ferris is done, and Alvarez thinks there's a real chance Marcus gets bail today." Carol pressed a hand to her mouth, and Donna reached over to squeeze her arm. "We've been sitting here since 6 this morning," Donna said, "waiting on any word at all." "He's going to be okay," Maddie said, reaching across the table to take Carol's other hand. "He never did anything wrong. Everyone's starting to see that now." Carol nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks despite the small smile forming on her lips. "He's spent his whole life looking out for people who couldn't look out for themselves. It just about killed me seeing him carried out of our own house in handcuffs." "I know," Maddie whispered. "I know exactly what that felt like to watch. But he's coming home, Carol. I believe that." The 3 of them sat together for hours that afternoon, drinking coffee, saying little, just being present with one another the way family does when waiting on news that matters. Other club members drifted in and out, checking on Carol, offering quiet words of encouragement, but mostly everyone just waited. The call came just after 7 that evening. Carol's phone rang, and she snatched it up so fast she nearly knocked over her coffee cup. Maddie watched her face carefully, holding her breath along with Donna. "Yes," Carol said, her voice trembling. "Yes, this is Carol Reyes." A pause. Her hand flew to her chest. "Oh, thank God. Thank God." Tears spilled freely now, but her voice cracked with something Maddie hadn't heard from her in weeks. Relief. Carol hung up the phone and turned to Maddie and Donna, sobbing so hard she could barely get the words out. "They granted bail," she said. "The judge granted bail. Marcus is coming home. He'll be here by morning." The morning air was cold and gray outside the county jail, the kind of cold that bites at your fingers and makes your breath show in little clouds. Maddie stood between Donna and Big Sam, her arms wrapped tight around herself, watching the front doors of the building like she could will them open just by staring hard enough. Dozens of club members had shown up. Bikes lined the street in neat rows, chrome catching the weak morning light. Nobody had asked them to come. They had just come, the way family does. Carol stood at the front of the crowd, closest to the doors, her hands clasped together so tight her knuckles had gone white. She hadn't slept, Maddie could tell. There were dark circles under her eyes, but there was also something else there now. Hope, plain and simple, sitting right on the surface where fear used to be. At exactly 9 o'clock, the doors opened. Marcus stepped out wearing the same clothes he'd been arrested in, wrinkled now, hanging a little looser on his frame than before. His face looked tired, older somehow, but his eyes found Carol immediately, like they'd been searching for her the whole walk down that hallway. Carol didn't wait. She ran to him, and he caught her, wrapping his arms around her so tight it looked like he might never let go. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. They just stood there, holding each other, Carol's shoulders shaking with quiet sobs, Marcus pressing his face into her hair. The crowd stayed quiet, giving them the moment they needed. A few of the club members wiped at their own eyes. Big Sam cleared his throat loudly and looked away, blinking fast. When Marcus finally pulled back from Carol, he kept one arm around her waist and turned, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Maddie. Something in his face broke open then. He walked toward her, and Maddie felt her own eyes fill up before he even said a word. "Maddie," he said, his voice thick. He pulled her into a hug, the same kind of hug he'd given her that first night at the gas station, solid and safe and real. "You didn't have to do what you did. You could have run. Nobody would have blamed you." "You didn't run either," Maddie said into his shoulder, her voice breaking. "You saw me that day at the diner and you didn't look away. I wasn't about to look away from you." Marcus pulled back enough to look at her, his hands on her shoulders, tears running freely down his weathered face now. "You fought for me the way I fought for you," he said. "I won't forget that. Not ever." "Neither will I," Maddie whispered. Around them, the crowd had turned into something like a celebration, quiet and full of relief instead of loud and boisterous. Club members clapped Marcus on the back one by one, shook his hand, told him how good it was to see him standing there a free man. Donna hugged him so hard she nearly knocked him over, and Big Sam pulled him into one of those rough, back-pounding hugs that men give each other when words aren't enough. Carol never strayed far from his side, her hand resting on his arm like she needed to keep touching him to believe he was really there. Maddie stood back a little, watching it all, feeling something settle in her chest that she hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace, maybe, or something close to it. That afternoon, word came that Ms. Alvarez was holding a press conference outside the county courthouse. Maddie drove over with Carol and Marcus, the three of them standing near the back of the small crowd that had gathered on the courthouse steps. Alvarez stepped up to a small podium, a stack of papers in her hand, her expression calm and steady. "As of this morning," she began, "all charges against Marcus Reyes and the motorcycle club have been formally dropped. The evidence brought forward proved conclusively that Mr. Reyes and his associates committed no crime and were in fact instrumental in bringing a much larger fraud case to light." A murmur went through the crowd. "Additionally," Alvarez continued, "Deputy Hal Ferris has been arrested on multiple charges, including corruption, evidence tampering, and accepting bribes in connection with the fraud scheme run by Trent Holloway. Mr. Holloway himself will face the full extent of fraud charges, thanks in large part to evidence gathered by Madeline Kessler, whose courage made this entire case possible." Maddie felt Carol's hand find hers, squeezing tight, and Marcus's arm came around her shoulders, solid and warm, as Alvarez's words settled over the crowd like sunlight breaking through clouds. 3 months later, the leaves outside Rosalie's diner had turned gold and orange, and Maddie Kessler had a key of her own. It wasn't much of an apartment. Just 2 rooms above the hardware store on 5th Street, with a window that stuck when it rained and a radiator that clanked at night. But it was hers. Nobody else's name was on the lease. Nobody checked her phone or asked where she'd been. She'd painted the little kitchen a soft yellow color, the same shade as the sunflowers Carol grew behind her bakery, and some mornings Maddie would stand in that kitchen with her coffee and just breathe, amazed at how quiet peace could feel. She worked the morning shift at Rosalie's 3 days a week now, and on Tuesday and Thursday nights, she drove 20 minutes to the community college for her accounting classes. Her textbooks sat in a neat stack on her kitchen table, corners worn soft from studying, sticky notes poking out of the pages like little yellow flags. Walt still met her every other Saturday at the library, going over her homework with the same patient care he'd once used to untangle Trent's fraud. "You've got a good mind for this," he told her one afternoon, tapping his pen against a ledger she'd balanced correctly on the first try. "Better than mine was at your age." "You're just saying that," Maddie said, but she couldn't stop the smile that spread across her face. "I don't just say things," Walt said, and that was that. Rosalie noticed the change in her, too. She'd catch Maddie during slow hours, bent over a notebook at the end of the counter, pencil moving fast across columns of numbers, and she'd shake her head with a proud little smile. "That girl's becoming quite the numbers whiz," Rosalie told anyone who'd listen, usually while refilling coffee cups for the regulars. "Started out barely able to make change for a 5, and now look at her. Gonna have her own office one day, mark my words." Maddie always ducked her head when she heard that, embarrassed but warm inside, like sunlight had found a crack to slip through. She still thought about that rainy Tuesday sometimes, the forced smile, the 4 fingers tapped against her coffee cup. She thought about Trent's voice, low and controlled, and the way fear had lived in her chest for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like not to carry it. She didn't think about him much anymore, not with anger, not even really with fear. Mostly she just felt grateful. Grateful she'd looked up that morning and Marcus had been watching. On Sunday, the diner filled up the way it always did after church let out. Families in their good clothes crowded into booths, kids swinging their legs and coloring on placemats, old-timers arguing gently over the crossword puzzle in the newspaper. The smell of bacon and fresh coffee hung thick in the air, and the bell over the door jingled every few minutes as someone new walked in. Maddie was refilling sugar containers behind the counter when she heard the deep rumble of motorcycles pulling into the lot outside. She didn't even have to look. She knew that sound now the way some people knew a familiar song. Marcus and Carol came through the door a minute later, Marcus holding it open for his wife with one weathered hand, the bell jingling above them. Carol waved at Maddie right away, her face bright, and made her way toward their usual booth by the window. Marcus stopped at the counter first. He looked good, Maddie thought. Rested. The tired lines that had carved themselves into his face during those awful weeks of the investigation had softened some, and his eyes had that same calm warmth she remembered from the very first day he'd slid a card across her table. "Morning, Maddie," he said, settling onto a stool. "Morning," she said, already reaching for the coffee pot. "Usual?" "You know it." She poured his coffee, and he wrapped both hands around the mug, watching her for a moment before he spoke again. "Rosalie tells me you're becoming quite the numbers whiz," he said, a teasing note in his voice, though his eyes were serious underneath it. Maddie laughed, feeling her cheeks warm. "She's exaggerating." "I don't think she is." Marcus set his mug down and looked at her steady, the way he always did, like he was really seeing her. "I'm proud of you, you know. Real proud. Look how far you've come since that rainy Tuesday morning. You were so scared you could barely hold your own coffee cup steady, and now look at you, running numbers, going to school, building a whole life for yourself." Maddie felt her throat tighten. But it wasn't the bad kind of tight anymore. It was the kind that came from being truly, deeply happy. She looked around the diner then. Really looked. Carol waving from the booth. Rosalie laughing with a table of regulars. Walt's usual seat empty for now, but he'd be by later, same as always. The bell over the door jingling as more familiar faces came through. This was hers now. All of it. The community she'd never known she was allowed to want. Maddie topped off Marcus's cup and moved on down the counter with the pot, working her way through the Sunday crowd out of habit more than thought. She refilled Mr. Whitfield's mug without him even looking up from his crossword. She smiled at the Hendersons and their 2 kids, who were fighting over the crayons on their placemats. She was halfway to the corner booth by the window before she really saw who was sitting there. A young woman, maybe 20, 22 years old. Dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that looked like it had been done in a hurry. She wore a cardigan that was too big for her, sleeves pulled down over her hands like she was trying to disappear inside it. Across from her sat a man in his 30s, broad-shouldered, dressed nice in a way that seemed almost too careful, like he'd picked out that shirt specifically to look like he had nothing to hide. He was talking low. Maddie couldn't hear the words from where she stood, but she didn't need to. She knew that voice, not his voice exactly, but the shape of it, the rhythm of it, controlled. Quiet enough that nobody else would notice, but sharp enough that the young woman across from him kept her eyes down on the table. Maddie's chest went tight before her mind even caught up to what she was seeing. She stepped closer, coffee pot in hand, doing what she always did, just filling cups, just another Sunday morning at Rosalie's. "Can I warm that up for you?" she asked, keeping her voice light and easy. The young woman looked up. Her smile came fast, practiced, the corners of her mouth pulling into place like she'd done it 1,000 times before. "Yes, please. Thank you." Maddie poured the coffee, and that's when she saw it. The young woman's hand was wrapped around her mug, and her fingers were moving. 4 fingers folded down over her thumb, tapping against the ceramic. Once, twice, a 3rd time. Her eyes flicked up to Maddie's for just a second, quick as a blink, before dropping back down to the table. Maddie's breath caught in her throat. She knew that signal. She'd made that signal herself, 3 months ago, sitting in a booth not so different from this one, terrified and smiling and hoping somebody, anybody, would see her. The coffee pot trembled slightly in her hand. She steadied it, forced her own smile to stay easy and unbothered, the way Marcus had done that morning so long ago. She didn't look at the man across from the woman. She didn't let her eyes linger too long. She just nodded, said, "You're welcome," like it was nothing at all, and turned to walk back toward the counter. Her heart was pounding now, hard and fast against her ribs, but her feet moved steady. She'd learned that from Marcus, too. "Don't rush. Don't spook anybody. Just move like you know exactly what you're doing." She set the coffee pot down on the warmer behind the counter and looked up. Marcus was still there, exactly where she'd left him, both hands wrapped around his mug. But he wasn't drinking his coffee anymore. He was watching her, his eyes steady and serious, the same way they'd been that rainy Tuesday morning when he'd caught her signal in the mirror behind the counter. He'd seen it too. Of course he had. Marcus saw everything. Their eyes met across the diner, over the heads of families eating pancakes and old men doing crosswords, over the noise of the bell jingling and the clatter of plates. For a moment, neither of them moved. There was just that look passing between them. quiet and certain, full of everything they'd both been through, and everything they now understood without needing to say a word. Maddie gave him a small nod. Marcus set his mug down gently on the counter and rose from his stool. Maddie untied her apron strings just enough to loosen them, took a breath, and reached for a fresh pot of coffee, one that had nothing to do with refills. Together, without exchanging a single word, they began to move across the diner floor toward the corner booth by the window, toward the young woman with the too big cardigan and the practiced smile and the 4 fingers tapping against her cup, carrying forward the same quiet lifeline that had once been thrown to Maddie herself. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.